Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sada, Carnegie's online Middle East journal. I'd like to welcome you to our last panel of today's conference. We will talk about the spillover from Libya into the Sahel. In this panel, we will try to tackle the complex Libyan conflict, particularly insecurity in the south, its main drivers and key players. And as if the conflict inside Libya is not enough, of course, events there impact security in the Sahel and vice versa. So our panel will examine the impact of cross-border networks and the movement of people and goods on the region's stability. And finally, we will touch on the role the international community can play to support local actors and communities. So to discuss these issues, we have Carnegie's own Fred Weary. Fred is a senior fellow in the Middle East program where he focuses on post-conflict transition, armed groups and identity politics in Libya, North Africa, and the Gulf. Joining us on VC is Faraj Najm. Faraj is a Libyan historian and writer. He's professor at University of Benghazi and author of Tribes, Islam, and State in Libya. We also have with us Manal Taha. Manal is a former fellow for North Africa and current consultant at the United States Institute of Peace, where she focuses on Libya and Niger. She was previously with the USAID Office of Transition Initiative in Libya, Sudan, and South Sudan. Each of our speakers will speak for about 12 minutes, and then we'll take questions from the audience. So with that, Fred will get us started.
Great. Well, thank you all, and thank you again for moderating. What I'd like to do to start us out with is to sort of canvas the fractured landscape of Libya and to try to understand the drivers of extremism, the factors that enable extremism to flourish in Libya and spill over into the Sahel. This is a map of Libya's contested control that shows you the factional breakdown in Libya today. Of course, the real question is one of a collapsed government, many different centers of power vying for territorial control. I think this also illustrates the sheer lunacy of trying to partition Libya into three parts if you were so inclined to do that. What I'd like to do is sort of look at the southwestern corner in particular. I was there last year in Ubari and Gat and Sebha. Obviously, this is a key zone where transnational extremist groups have found refuge, where they've set up logistics pipelines. The key thing to remember, I think, when we're looking at this country is that the notion of real border control was always illusory, even under Gaddafi. This was a dictator who managed the cross-border movement of illegal goods, of migrants. He devolved a lot of the control to his own tribe, so it was never secure. He never had the mechanisms in place to fully control. And we're talking about a movement of people and goods that have stretched back centuries, whether pilgrims, whether the slave trade. So these are networks that are firmly entrenched. The other, I think, myth that we need to dispel is the myth of communal conflict in the south, especially between the Tebu zone, which is over to the east, and the Tuareg zone over to the west. The notion that these two groups are historically, enemies needs to be challenged. For hundreds of years, they had an arrangement that divided up border control between the two. There were a lot of unspoken pacts. There were unspoken power hierarchies. After Gaddafi's rule, those collapsed. And the more important thing that I want to emphasize is that it is the result, the communal clashes, the conflict in the south is the result of a shortage of local economy. I mean, these are fights over economic resources. First of all, oil fields. If you look at Sharar and Al Fil there, the militia, the group that controls the oil field, has enormous leverage over the central government, over contracts. And the second source of conflict is over smuggling. It's over smuggling routes. And what happened after the revolution is the Tebu zone moved further to the west, threatening the Tuaregs' historic zone of control. combined with the closure of the Algerian border, meant that the migrant smuggling route shifted over to the Tebu. So this just shows you that this notion of sort of historic ethnic conflict, I think, needs to be challenged. So when you go to the region and you speak to young men, you speak to activists, you speak to community leaders, you get a real sense of the desperation there. I mean, this is a desperately poor area that was always neglected under Gaddafi. We're talking about shortages of electricity for days on end, shortages in hospital, a real absence of livelihood. And so, of course, the default is smuggling. I mean, this is the principal source of income. The other feature of this region, of course, is the utter absence of any formal government institutions, especially in the policing sector. So we're talking about militias that are tied to specific towns, neighborhoods, communal groups, ethnic groups, controlling their own portions of territory, controlling the border, and of course they're involved in the illicit border smuggling. The other feature that impacts southern insecurity, that provides a very conducive and fertile environment for extremists, is Libya's political conflict, which is up north, specifically the conflict between the so-called Dawn and Dignity camps since 2014. Again, very, very loosely represented between red and over to the west, the Government of National Accord, which really doesn't exert real territorial control, but we can look at the militias of Misrata moving down into the south. The underlying theme that you find going to the south is that the south has fallen victim to this national conflict. So these young men are enlisted into this northern political conflict. The northerners will use them as hired guns. They're used to, they're fighting way out of the south. They're fighting in Benghazi. They're fighting in the Oil Crescent. And so northern meddling, this northern factional conflict, has proven tremendously destabilizing to southern stability, to southern unity, and it's exacerbated these local fractures. Of course, this is all a very, very fertile ground for extremism. Let me just say a few words about the extremist presence, especially in the southwest corner. And the two words I want to emphasize here are transactional and contingent. When you go to the south, you get a sense that any extremist presence that is through this corner is negotiated, is the result of shared interest, is often the result of a lack of capacity. So when I visited the border town of Ghouta, right on the Algerian border, there were municipal leaders, there were militia leaders who were in fact charged with securing the border that simply didn't have enough vehicles, radios, personnel to control the border. And then, of course, the unspoken truth is that the extremists were able to negotiate access into this corridor, and they were quite candid about that as well. Obviously, we know the story of Tuareg grievances and how that has linked up to Islamist militancy in Mali. The thing I want to emphasize from a lot of conversations with the Tuareg is that there was a real sense of disenchantment with the Islamist project in Mali when these guys came back to Libya. Now, obviously, there is this sense among the Tuareg in the southwestern corridor that we're out here on our own, we're isolated, nobody's helping us. If somebody comes in and offers us a good, whether it's security, whether it's protection, of course we're going to welcome that. And that sort of instrumental approach was crucial to ISIS securing a foothold in Sirte. There are marginalized communities in ISIS, whether certain neighborhoods, whether certain tribes, that will welcome the extremists for what they offer, which is protection, which is really some good. So again, transactional. The issue of southern extremist linkages to the north, to northern extremists, is certainly there. Going back to Belmukhtar, to his links up to Ajdabia and Benghazi, to Ansar al-Sharia's role in funneling volunteers down into Mali. But what I think we're seeing is AQIM is primarily focused on the Sahel as a base of operations. They're using Libya as strategic depth for logistics, for resupply, for medical care. And so they're negotiating sort of access in this area. They did issue a very public statement for their volunteers to go fight all the way up north into Benghazi to fight General Haftar's forces. But again, I think that was mostly at the level of a statement. The ISIS presence, again, it's residual, it's pooling, as Eric said. They've pushed down from Sirte, south of Beni Walid, north of Sabha. They're going to encounter a very crowded marketplace of communal armed groups, of rival Islamist militias from AQIM. The competition between AQIM and ISIS was really playing out in Derna, up in the north. In Benghazi, there was a tactical cooperation. There was, you take this neighborhood, we'll take this street. So there was a form of cooperation. But again, could ISIS, reemerge in the southwest corner? My sense is, from the Tuareg, its ability to really penetrate the social fabric in the southwest is fairly limited. And so again, we're talking about logistics. We're talking about some sort of transactional process where they would negotiate access. And let me just leave you with a final thought about the narratives of extremism in Libya. Obviously, this is a fractured country. There are different factional groups that have an interest in portraying their rivals as harboring extremists. So when you get certain information, when you get intelligence reports about a particular ISIS cell in this location, is it coming from the LNA? Is it coming from Haftar's camp? Is it coming from the Misratis? And these local communal groups down in the south are very well aware of the counterterrorism narrative. The Tebu in particular have tried to portray themselves as natural counterterrorism partners for the French, for the U.S., against their enemies, the Tuareg, who they suspect of being all extremists. So there are these factional narratives that are being pushed that we need to be wary of.
The viewer 2 minutes, but thank you. Faraj, if the technology will hold, I think we'll go ahead and move on to you. Can you hear us? Go ahead, Faraj.
I just forgot to unmute my microphone. Can you hear me okay? I can hear you. Can you hear me? Hear me? Hello?
Faraj?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
See you. I can hear you.
Yes, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay. Well, thank you very much, and good evening to you all from breezy Benghazi. The talk about the Islamists in Libya, let me just provide you with some information historically, but also in relation to the neighboring countries to Libya. Libya, as you all know, is an enormous country. It's a continent in a country. It's almost bigger than 22 European countries. Just to put it in perspective,
Faraj?
It's bigger than Britain 7. Yes.
Faraj, can you speak up? We're having a hard time hearing you.
Can you hear me like this?
Better.
Is
much
this
better.
loud enough? Right. Okay. It's to do with this small thing in here. Right. All right. Just let me just repeat what I've just said. Libya is a continent in a country, even though it has a small population. It's almost bigger than 22 European countries. And just to put it in perspective, it's bigger than Britain 7 times. We have a little over 6 million people live in this country. 95% of them, they live in the coast, whereas 95% of the country is a desert. But it's a good desert, it's full of oil. We have borders bigger than, there are more than 4,000 kilometers of borders, which sadly unguarded right now, and we have a problem in guarding them. The population in the deserts, where the problems lie right now, it's around 500,000. They are scattered in a number of towns, as there are some of them displayed in your board. The majority of those Libyans, they are either Arabs, who constitute the majority, and followed by the Tuaregs and the Tabus. They're all Muslims and they're all Sunnis. They all live in tribal sort of like communities. They are split along the ethnical lines, even though they sometimes do mix in a big city like Sabha, which is the capital of the south. Most of those people, whether Arabs, Tuaregs, or Tabus, do have relations across the border. As you all know, the Tuaregs, they are divided into 6 countries, whereas the Tabus are divided into 3 countries. That's Libya, Chad, and Niger. The Arabs, as obviously they move around in those African and neighboring Arab countries. The Tuaregs, they live mostly in Ubari, Gdamis, but also Ghat, Adri, and other small towns, but they do cohabit with others in Sabha. Whereas the Tabus, mostly they populate towns like Murzig, Qatroun, Laranib, and in the east, in the southeast, in Kufra and Ribiana, but also they do live in Sabha with others as well. As for the biggest Arab tribe in the south, which has dominated politics in the last, say, I would say 100 years, is the tribe of Awlad Suleiman, led by the Saif al-Nasr family. They are mostly in Sabha, and they do have problems currently with the Tabus. The Tabus, obviously, they constitute a fighting force, especially after the revolution. They do control a big sway, but also big zones, and they pay their allegiance to the parliament and to its government in the east. Whereas the Awlad Suleiman, mostly they have their allegiance to the west, and they allied themselves with the militias of Misrata. The Tuaregs, they do sort of like swing between these 2 political groups. The south, as we all know, they suffer from a great deal of marginalization, but also neglect, as we all know that those who control power and wealth are mostly in the north, whereas the south is left with nothing, even though most of the oil and water comes from the south. And as a result, a great deal of human trafficking, the business of human trafficking has grown, but also smuggling of fuel and consumer goods, which is subsidized by the state, as well as drugs and weapons, has risen in the last 6 years, especially after the revolution. Some of the Arabs, but also the Tuaregs, do have relations with communities and those neighboring countries that have some terror groups. To name one, the Tuaregs do have some relation with Azawad in the south, and some other groups. The political Islam has manipulated this to their benefit, and also since the area is far remote from the central government in the north, they managed to capitalize on this and use those bases in the south to penetrate either deep in the south, or to use them as refuges whenever they needed, as we have seen recently with ISIS fleeing Sirte and taking refuge in the south. However, the Tabus, we have no evidence that they do harbor any extremist or outlawed groups, as evident from their dealings with the government in the east. Some European countries had tried to strike some deals with some of these tribes, as we saw recently an agreement which was signed between the Tabu and Awlad Suleiman and Robe under the auspices of the Italians, which does infringe on the sovereignty of the country, especially with without the permission or the consent of the central authority. But again, there is a problem of central authority, which one we deal with. As we know, the country is split between at least 2, if not 3 governments there on the north. Right now, there are problems in the south, especially around the military base of Temenhand. This is not just a military base, but also a military complex. It's currently occupied by the Misratan militias with some of their southern allies, the National Army, under the auspices of General Haftar. They're trying to retake the base and extend their control over the south. And there is sadly a great deal of bloodshed going on right now as we speak. Some of these militias, especially the Misratans and others, they have sought the help and the aid of some of the Chadian opposition forces that have taken refuge in Libya. To summarize the problems in the south, as obviously part of the overall problems of Libya, but these have particular meanings. The Southerners do suffer a great deal of poverty and neglect as compared to their northern brethren. They have a problem of unemployment, and as a result, we've seen the exploitation of young people, and they using them in smuggling and other illicit activities. There is a smaller political participation because of the geopolitics and the domination of the north of modern Libya, but also there is an element of tribalism in the south and also racism, as we see there are 3 races trying to live next to each other. 2 are disfranchised, whereas the Arabs are having the better deal. Also, there is as a result, there is a problem of inequality and everything, and the Tabu, followed by the Tuaregs. They are the ones who are suffering most. But again, the South, I think, it's a victim of globalization and regionalization. There is a problem of terror worldwide, and their homeland or their communities are used as transitional pipes, if you like, especially in the trafficking of humans from the south into Europe, but also exporting the problems of the north into the south and trying to settle their differences at the expense of southerners. And I think I'll leave it to that.
Faraj, since you can't hear me,
we'll have some questions.
Since you can't see me,
Yes.
you have a couple minutes to wrap up. 2 minutes. Oh, okay.
I think I have
Didn't
wrapped
hear.
up.
Sorry, I didn't hear.
Did you hear that?
All right, you were perfect. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to Mana. Thanks, Faraj.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. I want to talk about the spill out of Libya at the beginning, like what exactly what is this spill out of Libya? Let me start with there is whatsoever coming out of Libya now is not something new. It was exist during Gaddafi. It's the difference that it was under one man control, but now it has a different players. So what is it? How it looks like? This is spill out of Libya. Let me see how exactly the thing that's going from Libya during Gaddafi out to the neighboring countries. Gaddafi used to train militant rebels, which is now we have a lot of militants and rebels and armed people. They go like in Mali or in many countries. So there is no big differences except Gaddafi was there. And then you have the trafficking. Gaddafi, he was there. When he was not happy with France or with Europe, he would just fill the boat of immigrants and send them to Europe, and it happened before. So the change is now changing for who is the new player, who is in the control now. We have multiple players now in this new dynamics. If I look at the border, we tend to focus in southwest border because it's close to IQM, it's close to Mali, it's close. But we really don't see a lot, we don't put emphasis on the border with Egypt and border with Sudan and border with Chad, which are very important now, specifically. Like just 2 days before there was a fight on the south of Jakub, and people were killed with militias bordering these areas. And if I look at the border between Egypt and specifically area of Jakub, south of Tobruk, like 90 or 100 kilometers south of Tobruk, Jakub area, and then you have Kufra. This area are opening a strategic area for smuggling routes between Sudan and Egypt. And who is the main players over there? You find some tribal leaders, mainly Awlad Ali with Egypt, and then you have Zuwaya in Kufra together with Tubu. And they are competing each other to control these routes. Okay? Then you have the border with Chad. You have Tubu, also they are competing with Quran within themselves, but also with Zuwai to control these routes, smuggling routes. And then you have Niger. In Niger, they're competing with Tawarik and Tubu together. And in Algeria, Algerians are better in boarding their borders, okay? But still, there is a way you can go through the Salvador Triangle. But also, you go to Tunisia. Tunisia, Zintan, they may play some role in smuggling in that small corridor, which is mountain, which is also reducing the amount of smuggling. Look at this whole picture of smuggling routes around Libya. The new players are too many militants groups that they're controlling these areas. Who stand among them strongly, specifically in Chad or in Sudan, bordering Sudan, or in Niger? Tubu. Tubu tribe you find them are very empowered in terms of controlling these smuggling routes. Why that happened? Because during Gaddafi collapse, during the revolution, Tubu, they found the opportunity to go and guard these gates from Madama, Al-Tom, Al-Wig, and Al-Sara, and area around Kufra was Ribiana, which historically is their area. But still, in the past, they used to be controlled by Gaddafi border, but actually they say it was in Gaddafi leaders. And that's why you find now Gaddafi and Tubu are close. They don't fight each other. Ironically, because Tubu, they fought against Gaddafi. But immediately after the revolution, they allied with Gaddafi because that is one of the interests. So you have this alliances also is built up, tribal alliances over the smuggling. What I want to say here, if we want to see what's coming out of Libya, we look at the whole border as one complex. And then we look at every tribe and who is the player and what's their interest in this area. When they fighting against Gaddafi, Tubu, they take a chance and guard this. Until now, they don't want to move, and they will not move. And they just bordered strategic areas together with the oil fields in Sharar and Al-Field. Since then, they don't want to move unless now, recently, in 2014, Misrata helped to move them. They moved them in the advance for the Tawarik in Sharar oil field close to Obari. So these dynamics of Tubu being in all these areas is telling us exactly it's competing of the oil, access to oil fields and smuggling routes. That is the two main economic revenue for these two groups. And that's make it very difficult, actually, trying to move them away from it. But I was looking for what's the opportunity actually now we have it that we can really give it to Tubu, at least to be integrated. First, we need to address the cultural grievances for Tubu. Tubu has been neglected for a long time. The language was neglected. And then not only in Libya, even in Chad. There are better situation in Chad, but in Niger. So you have this group that they are in these three countries. They want some recognition. And now they found the money, so they will not give it easy. So, and they're involved in many fights. They're involved even with Haftar in the north. So they know how exactly to ground it themselves militarily. I think we're having the opportunity of now Libyan constitution in development. Give them some recognition or give them the rights recognition in this constitution is an opportunity for international community to emphasize on it, specifically with Arab Libyans that they don't want to give a chance to include this minorities' rights in the constitution. This can also help actually address some of the identity grievances within the Tubu group. So this is mainly about what is spill out of Libya. It's all the phenomena, new players. That's the main thing of it. But let me see what the international community is doing. I had the chance. I'm lucky because I went to Niger and Chad and Libya. So I asked people on the ground, okay, specifically in the area of like security, appearance of Americans and French. When I was in Niger, I know my colleague Eric spoke about the security forces on the ground. The international community, European and American, emphasize on this military training and military support for the army in Chad or in Niger, which is good. Okay, it helped to lift up the capacity for the local forces actually to counter terrorism. But at the same time, how local people perceive, how actually see them. And specifically, when I was in Agadez, I asked some Tubu that they're actually doing this kind of trafficking. And they told me, frankly, they will not dare to touch us. And I was like, why? They said because they know that if they touch us, we're going to turn against them. Then I said, how you prevent actually confront them? The French base north and close to Madama, they told me that they have the day and have the night. So it's very clear that's division of work, or division of time actually, not work. So this is a way of actually they can conduct their businesses. But also, what is about the security forces of these countries on the ground? Every Thursday there is a convoy protected by the local forces in Niger to guard the travelers or passengers, which are the people, the immigrants that they go to Madama and then cross the Tom, where they pay money for the army there, the Niger army, and they go to Libya. So this is also part of how we can handle the issue of smuggling and trafficking on the area, working with the local forces capacity and deal with the corruption, how actually they protecting them and they take money out of these passengers or West Africans immigrants to come to Libya. So this is also part of the whole dilemma. And then you have, and just of time, I can talk to 3 days. So then I think also let me just go to what we can do to prevent violent extremism, because I know people here are very, very concerned about violent extremism. Southern Libya is an area for operation and logistics, as you can say, but it's not actually an area now you have like extremists coming in Sabha or coming in Obari. They may exist during the election. There's some groups coming in Sabha and they said election is haram, forbidden. Okay, we don't want that. We don't Islamic State. So there exists, but they don't come out and fight. Why? Because there's other competing forces there, which is the tribe militias, strong. They will not let them come. Okay, so what exactly we can do to prevent those people not to come to South Libya? We tend here in America or in Europe or Western perspective for conflict, we have to have two players. A fight B, which is not the case in Libya. Libya is the bubbles of conflicts, too many conflicts. each one it has to be dealt separately with the different root causes of this conflict. So, and ISIS itself, they're very smart. They figured that out. The way ISIS came in Sirte is completely different than it's in Derna. In Derna, they make use of the power struggle between families, and they align with one family, and they bomb up, and they call their foreigner fighters. In Sirte, they actually came from originated their Noflia, they used to fight in Afghanistan, and they are Libyans. And they just go there, enable the situation. The central area is vacuum from power or any militias. It's only very benign, peaceful tribes. They made use of that vacuum of security forces. So they know how to use actually the local substances and the local existing of power so whenever we want to deal with preventive or working with counterterrorism, we have to look at the cases by cases, not just like one approach or one enemy. ISIS in Sirte is not in one Sibrata. It's different from the one is going to come in Sabha, or now is going to come to Jufra. So that's all you have to consider. So.
Thanks, Manal. I think we'll have to leave it there, and we can open the floor for questions. I will take questions 3 at a time. Please be sure to identify yourself, and again, be sure to ask a question. Go ahead.
Hi, Brian Stout, Foreign Policy Magazine. At the beginning of the month, the black market rate of the dinar exceeded $7 US per dinar. This week, it has exceeded 8, and it's due to exceed 10 by the end of the month. How do you see that affecting the smuggling business, both with regard to humans and of oil?
Thank you. I'm Rasmus Bozup from the Danish Institute for International Studies. I have a question on an issue that sort of came through here and there, but which I personally am pretty concerned about. I want to sort of ask the presenters. The question of to what extent regional rivalry may be one of the sort of upcoming or even already very present drivers in these conflicts. And well, we may not necessarily be talking about jihadists as such, but the broader political conflict. Fred spoke about it as sort of the fractionalism in the north. But this issue of Egypt having obviously their, let's say, proxy friends, and Algeria opting for a different solution in Libya, as far as I've understood, much more inclusive. And we may have sort of French and European, Italian diverging ideas of how is this actually going to behave. So the question is, with these regional powers, we've seen sort of the escalation of the Syrian conflict exactly along these lines, with regional powers pushing their proxies, etc. Is this something that you can recognize as a potential sort of prolongation, protection of these conflicts that are obviously in their roots local, but do have this sort of potential to?
Thanks. Sam Davidoff Gore from the International Foundation for Electoral Systems. My question is about the recent announcement of revelation by the Italians that there had been an agreement between the Tebu and the Tuareg and a bunch of tribal leaders, which was pretty swiftly rejected by the Tebu National Assembly on the basis of not wanting international interference, and also saying that the Tebu representatives at the negotiations weren't actually representative of the Tebu. So my question is, is there actually buy-in from the tribes, especially the locals, to have some sort of negotiated control over the border? And I guess, is international negotiation going to be particularly useful in this situation? And is there any desire by those groups to have any sort of settlement?
Sure. So on the economic question, I mean, my broad answer is, look, this is going to widen the circle of complicity in smuggling. So any, you know, I mean, when you go to Tripoli, you sense a real desperation there. I mean, the long lines outside of banks. I mean, people who don't, who were trained as doctors or lawyers are now becoming involved in the smuggling business, in the migrant trafficking business, running safe houses. Former taxi drivers are now, you know, shuttling the migrants along. So the circle of complicity will widen, and the black market economy will expand, I think. So that's the pessimistic, you know, short answer. And again, it goes back to the fact that these are entrenched, you know, traditions. You go to, you know, Zawiya, Sabrata. I mean, the networks there of smuggling are historic. Whether it was illicit goods, whether it was people, and then it's jihadists. So again, the jihadist networks that were flowing in through Sabrata were being run by traffickers who had previously done migrant smuggling, just switched over to funneling Tunisian jihadists across the border. So these are entrenched problems, and the currency crisis will only, you know, sort of widen the scope of them. The regional dimension is absolutely a factor to understanding Libya's problems today, and especially down in the south. So Emirati weapons funneled to the LNA have been showing up in the Tebu fighters. So when you talk to these, you know, community leaders down in the south, the Tuareg, Tebu, they say, look, we're and I don't, perhaps with some exaggeration, but not much, that, you know, we're the pawns. We're the pawns in this larger northern conflict, but we're the pawns in this broader regional Cold War. And of course, that Cold War goes back to 2011 revolution, when you had the Qataris backing some factions, the Emiratis backing the other, and of course, it really gained steam in 2014 with the launch of Operation Dignity. And you know, these regional powers, the key culprits, have signed up in theory to the government of national accord, but they've been hedging all along. So that arms flow, that support has never stopped, and it was absolutely crucial to getting us to where we are today. And the South, I think, has fallen victim to that. On the question of this peace deal in Rome, look, I mean, when you go on the ground, there's a real center-periphery disconnect. So we talk to leaders on the ground, whether militia, local communities, and there's this sense of when the Tuareg representative goes to Tripoli, let alone when he goes to Tunis or when he goes to Rome, he loses touch with his people. And so any deal, you know, there's this sense we never actually see the results of these deals. We never see the aid. So my sense is any sort of grand bargain, isn't going to stick because power is so fragmented and diffuse in the South, as we've heard. I mean, we're talking about multiple players, and so what you have is a number of sort of individual ceasefires being negotiated in this town that are sealed with tribal mediators. In this town, again, a tribal ceasefire. But is that really a foundation to build a broader institutional peace? No. The other flawed logic with this notion of, as I understand it, the Rome Agreement, that if you got these groups to agree on sharing the border, would that curtail the migrant smuggling? No, it wouldn't. They would just divide it up among themselves the way they had it before. That was the Midi Agreement. They had this, you get this territory. So the Tebu had the route, west or east of the Salvador Pass. And then, the Tuareg had the Algerian route for flowing through Gat. The big problem now is that route has been closed, so now the Tebu are dominating it. So,
Want to add anything?
I just want to add of how the best way to can actually get Tubu buying into the national dialogue and the national constitutional process. It's not an easy answer, given the fact that Tubu now they are very empowered. Tubu, they have the say in. They know that they back up themselves with the arm, and they align with Haftar, with militias, with money, border control, and with the political alliances, or at least buying in Chad. So they are not actually against Chadian government. They are involved in Chad government. Some of the minister of the security or security or internal security in Niger, Tubu. So they are there. They have that backup. So what is the opportunity for them to push for their rights is through Libya, because it's fragile, it's fragmented, there's opportunities. They know that if the language is being addressed in the constitution, that's opportunity for them. So they will push till they will find what they want. Or there's other power that can tell them that no, you can't have everything. So that is the balance in new Togo reality.
Faraj, would you like to add anything?
Yes, well, I think the problem is being agitated mainly by local players. Let's say the Islamists in particular, who lost the election, they are causing some unease. And this has made way for others to come in. Obviously, as we all know, that the Islamists are supported and financed by the Qatari government, but also the government of Erdogan of Turkey, and therefore their opponents had to go and seek support from others, mainly from Egypt, which is anti-Muslim Brotherhood, the United Arab Emirates, and recently when we saw the British and the Italians supporting the Misrata militias, the Easterners had to go to the Russians. So the problem in Libya is being agitated not just by local players, but also by their protege outside the country, which is adding fuel to the fire.
Thanks, Faraj. Any more questions?
Hi. I had a quick question. I'm a
Can you
little.
identify yourself?
Oh, sorry. Lucy Amadou with Counterpart International. And I'm a little bit curious about the problem that with immigration, right, in Libya. I'm more familiar with the Sahel than immigration. And I know a couple of months ago, I believe, the Libyan government repatriated a lot of West Africans who had immigrated. So I'm interested to see what it was under Gaddafi's regime and how it changed from the Gaddafi's regime to the situation now in terms of the immigration from West Africa and what the causes are.
Mariam, Michelle, over here.
Michelle Dunn from Carnegie. A couple of people have alluded to Russia's role in Libya. I'm wondering if the speakers can say a little bit more. I mean, we've seen reports about Russian special forces, perhaps based in Western Egypt, operating in Libya. A few media reports about the Russians' growing relationship with Haftar. Haftar possibly playing the Russians and Egyptians off against each other a little bit. But I guess the question is how serious of a factor is Russia becoming as yet another outside player in Libya, or is this still, at this point, a very minor factor?
There. Is that good? Okay. Any more questions? Anybody else?
Jeff Howard from the UK Foreign Office. A quick question about the increasing role of Madkhali Salafists in Libya, and in particular, if you see their role increasing in the south. Particularly, we've heard reports about their increasing influence amongst the Awlad Suleiman, and whether you see this to be a particular point of concern, specifically in the south.
Yes. I want to talk about the immigration. How was it during Gaddafi? Libya was rich, so most of the immigrants, their final destination was Libya, mainly, or majority. Okay, except the people that they have like they really look for a different. They go to Europe, which was not really something that they think about. So the guy was in control of the border. The guy was in control of the coast border also. So he knows how to control this. So people, they come, and sometimes he bring them as the workers in his country. So that's That is the pattern during the Gaddafi. But sometimes whoever worker in Libya at that time, and he's not happy with Europe, he will just can ship give a free shipping to Europe. And there's people, they went there through that opportunities. But I had the chance. I was in Malta, and last year, and I asked some people that they came through the desert from Sudan, and they originated from Eritrea, Somalia, and Somalia and Sudan and Ethiopia, and Bangladeshi. They come with the boat. They come to Libya with this very organized smuggle traffical network, which also depend on the tribal connections. In a specific routes, it has a specific tribe that they take those people from Dongola in northern Sudan. They bring them to Ajdab, area close to Ajdabia, which is specific tribe. Then from Ajdabia, there is another tribe will take them. They move to the north until they are in Tripoli or in Zawiya or Zuwara to go to Europe. You have the same routes, completely controlled and organized by tribal connections. You have every tribe, they have a point to reach, then you give, okay, and then you go with other tribe. So that is the pattern of how the people transformed and immigrated in Libya. I want to talk about Russia. I know it's very, Russians, they didn't hide it, their work with Haftar. It's very clear they just sent him this, one of these flights or helicopters, and they took him for meetings. Something that is not hidden, okay? And they very vocal about it. But the only thing that I want to just think, that's what I want to emphasize it, and I think it's going to be a real test for the new administration relationships with Europe, because if Russia in the backyard of Europe, okay, in Libya, and that means it's gonna European Union and EU will not be, and NATO will not be happy with that. So that's how actually US is going to handle these relationships with the European Union and NATO, having Russia on the backyard of Europe. So that's I want to know also. That's a question.
Faraj, would you like to answer these questions?
Yeah, if I can just touch on the Russian relation, especially I'm based here in the East, and I'm close to this. Sadly, what the West, especially America and Britain, did, they left a vacuum here, especially with the legitimate elected democratic parliament, and they tried to force down those Islamists who were rejected by the ballot box and be part of the political game, and since they couldn't be in Libya, people like Jonathan Weiner, who's the American envoy, did ignore the East and just concentrated in the West, and especially they banked on the militias of Misrata. And therefore, the people in the East, especially the army, found itself left alone, especially in this awful fight against terrorism, and they did not appreciate the effort by General Haftar, and therefore there were calls to look for other supporters, and certainly they went east. They went to Russia, they went to China. But they were contented with the fact that they had the Egyptians on board, they had the Saudis, the Jordanians, the Emirates, and the Russians, and they said, "Hey, who needs America or Britain?" Since they could not really help us, and therefore, mind you, the Russians, they have not physically offered much. Mainly it's a moral as well as political support. But from evidence on the ground, I cannot really see much given to the Libyans. Not as much as the French did, even though it's a little. But the biggest involvement was from the Arab neighbors, particularly Egypt and the UAE. But the Russians, no, but the political support, it was very much needed. As for the Salafis, they played a very pivotal role in the fight against terrorism. They did provide the theological argument against them. They pulled the carpet from underneath them. They were hardened fighters, and they did a hell of a job, especially with the NLA. As for the South, I think this is repeated again. The formula they did in the East, they are repeating it in the South as well. Thank you.
Yes, so just to add to that, I mean, I think the Russian role was actually, I think, a little more crucial than we've heard. I think they helped print the currency in the East, which was a huge boon to the East. They've offered medical support to wounded fighters. They're providing spare parts. But again, is this really sort of a game-changing wholesale support, to one side, to General Haftar? I think what they're trying to do is exert some leverage in that whatever new government emerges, if there's some new formulation, they will have a friendly ally. We have to remember the number of arms contracts that they lost after the revolution, the sense of real bitterness after the regime change, after they abstained on the UN vote. And so there's this narrative, I think, that they're pushing that, we're sort of cleaning up the mess. And so I think we're sort of at the level of, narrative here. There's a huge economic dimension. Are they really trying to pull a Syria? I don't think they have the sort of institutional, levers to do that in Libya. I think the Libyan, landscape is completely different than what they had in Syria in terms of proxies, in terms of networks that they can use. So again, I think they're pushing this envelope. They're trying to exert leverage. I think General Haftar, for his support, is playing that, very well to try to get our U.S. attention. So again, when I met with him in 2014, and this was a tactic that he said, look, the Russians are knocking at my door, the Chinese, but I really want U.S. support. It's classic, proxy bargaining. So I think that's kind of the way I would frame Russian support right now. The Madkhali Salafis, again, huge presence in the policing sector in the East and also in Tripoli in terms of militias playing the role of police, running prisons. In Sebha, they're present. I visited a prison in Sebha that was run by Madkhali Salafis. They were sort of doing their sort of re-indoctrination with a heavy dose of sort of Islamist discourse. I don't know if it's still there. I know the SDF, the Special Deterrence Force in Tripoli, was heavily involved in that, and the Misratans were facilitating that. But beyond that, I just don't have any window into the south. I know there's a presence also in Kufra. There's reports of Salafi militias among the Zuway there. So again, I think they're a force across the country. They're certainly present. Kufra, Marj, Beida, and they're taking over sort of these policing functions. The migrants. The question was, what's changed between Gaddafi and now? Is that the? Yeah, I mean the basic. Answer is, and I visited a number of migrant detention centers. It's just become a huge, horrifically abusive, business. And so it's these reports of slave markets, the forced, labor, the complicity of so-called coast guards on the coast in Zawiya. So the uniformed personnel that are supposed to be actually policing this in places like Zawiya are actually complicit. So-called NGO-run migrant detention centers are actually complicit. So again, the web of complicity is just expanded. And the other thing, when you talk to these migrants about repatriation, these countries, Niger, they don't have a diplomatic presence in Libya anymore. So this is another problem. So they've kind of been forgotten. So this is a huge change as well. So.
Take one more round of questions. Is there any questions?
Redali Amori, independent consultant. My question is about an incident that took place in December. I don't know if, just wondering what you heard about it. It's about General Haftar bombing an armed group opposed to Deby, President Deby of Chad. and the incident took place weeks after Haftar visited the capital of Chad, in Jamina. So I'm just wondering, maybe because you were on the ground, if you heard what are the reactions to this incident? Was it legitimate or coincidental? Like, what did you hear on the ground? Thank you.
Didn't hear about that.
Sorry. Sorry, just one more question.
There is some rumor saying that there is a Chadian rebel in South Libya around Kufra, but the rebellion against the Chadian government. They said that, but I didn't hear that. I know Haftar hit Ribiana at some point, which is the border south of Kufra, but it was not because of the Chadian rebel. It's because they said there is some intelligence came to him, as it's been reported, that there's some group of ISIS group that they were doing some logistic things in that area.
If I may add before I get cut off.
Hold on just a minute. Go ahead, Faraj.
Yes, it's my battery is going to go in a minute. I just wanted to add that the Chadian opposition forces have been attacked in the last 2 days in the Jufra Basin. They are in the south as well, in Taminhant, and the Libyan television has shown some images of soldiers, Chadian opposition soldiers, who were captured, but also others who have been terminated by the Libyan Air Force.
Great. Thanks, Faraj. I think there's one more question. Go ahead.
If there's time.
Questions,
Rasmus Bozorg from the Danish Institute for International Studies again. I wanted to ask a question broadly to the panel again on sort of the future of the GNA. It's been there for a year, and all the three presentations had in each their way pointed out to the what we could call sort of the general failure of reestablishing central authority. So ushered in through a year-long process of UN dialogue with several regional actors, et cetera, et cetera. We all know the story. The question is, what are the options for moving that process onwards? Are there any chances that the decentralized whatever policy could help that failed centralization effort, or do you see any way that this could come up flying again? And or is there another better alternative that is out there that I just haven't seen lately? Thank you.
And Claire, do you want to ask?
Well, I suppose mine's Claire Spencer, Chatham House. I suppose a related question is, what does the panel foresee is going to break the stalemate in Libya and how things are going to develop? And that is with or without the GNA, because that may, in my estimation, be endless wishful thinking on the part of the sponsors of that particular initiative for the reasons that Rasmus has outlined.
Go to Faraj first before his connection runs out. Faraj, would you like to address these questions quickly?
Yeah, for Claire's question, I don't think I agree with you. The GNA, this so-called Khairat agreement, it's going to bring any peace to Libya. It's been rejected in the ground here. There is a problem with the outcome of it, and the so-called GNA government in Tripoli, it cannot even look after itself, let alone looking after the people of Libya. So there is a serious problem. As for the way out, God knows, we don't know. Certainly Haftar is and there's a great deal of popular support here for him, and they are pushing for a military solution. One has to wait and see if this is going to bring the peace and the settlement that we all, aspire for. But I doubt very much. It has to be a negotiated a settlement. But again, I think there are some elements, especially those Islamists who have taken up arms, need to be demilitarized before any peaceful settlement can be reached.
Fred, do you want to do?
Well, again, the GNA is facing huge problems. I mean, just in terms of its own security, in terms of a real critique is how it disperses funds to municipalities. I mean, there's just a whole list. So I think we can agree that it's failing, that there needs to be some new reformulation. There needs to be some new revision. So again, what I'm against is sort of throwing it out before there's something else to replace it. And of course, military conquest is not an option. The prime minister in the East, Finley, just came out and said this is the only solution, which of course I think is just infeasible and would of course lead to tremendous bloodshed. I think what needs to happen is there needs to be some new negotiation forum. There's been a number of tracks proposed by the Algerians, the Tunisians. I think there's a huge role for U.S. diplomatic muscle in this. But again, we're talking about addressing two key areas that were never part of the original LPA, and that's the security sector. I mean, getting the armed groups on board in terms of what is the new military going to look like in terms of command structures, in terms of the different groups, in terms of merging the older military with the so-called militias, and then some mechanism for the dispersal of oil resources. I mean, transparency, this economic question, this management of economic resources is so crucial, and that was never part of the first agreement too. But of course, getting the regionals on board. I mean, this strategy of hedging that, yes, we sign up to this agreement, but meanwhile, under the table, we're backing a faction to obstruct the agreement, is a non-starter. So
I may just say small things, okay? For I want to go back for the history because we have to deal with Libyan history. We supported Tobruk, okay? Tobruk came out. Before Tobruk leave, then we have the GNA. Then Tobruk refused to go. So we have two governments now, and now actually three. So I'm a little bit skeptical about putting one on place while moving this gradually. So I think the approach to Libya, dealing with this local conflict as a rapid response emergencies, but at the same time action, at the same time work at the national level. I think we need to be creative, like think out of the box. Like international community were smart when they did the Kosovo model. So why not something like that? If that could work, that should be buying from Libyans, collaborate with Libyans, but at the same time, Libyans, it's very difficult now for Libyans themselves to manage all this dilemma and mess inside their country. So they need outside support. But how this support could come to them, that is the way we should really think about model that can really help to do this one model and just go for let's stop thinking about, let's empower this group, maybe they will come and do something. Libyans are not patient with their government. They will give them 1 year, 2 years that they will be against them. Because this is the way it's like when you are frustrated after the conflict and there is no order and no institutions to give you any security. So that's what I say.
Very much, Manal. Thank you very much, Fred, and thank you, Faraj. I think Michelle would like to come up and say a few closing words first.